Have you ever felt a deafening emptiness? A silence that isn't peace, but the absence of something essential? Close your eyes for a moment and place yourself there, vast, blistering, merciless. This isn't a point on any map. It's a landscape of the soul, your inner desert, the scorched ground of your inner life, where everything superficial is burned away. This place, so often feared and avoided, is actually the only stage where truth can reveal itself. It's there, stripped of all illusions, that the self has the chance to encounter itself, to touch what some would call God. Welcome to Shadow Work Stories, a space devoted to the courage of looking within. Today, we begin the inner crossing through the shadow, a journey that can rewrite your relationship with pain and with the sacred. Through the lens of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, we'll explore how facing your shadow self is not a punishment, but the master key to your spiritual awakening. You'll understand the archetypes that shape you and discover why shadow work, the plunge into what you most repress, is the deepest inner healing you can experience. I promise that by the end of this journey, you will both have the compass and the courage to transform your desert into your greatest sanctuary of power. If you're tired of mirages and ready for truth, if you sense something greater waiting for you in the silence, then you are exactly where you need to be. We begin our inner crossing. To understand the desert of the soul, we must first understand the desert in myth. Across nearly every great tradition of spiritual storytelling, the desert is never a detour, it is a demanded passage. Think of the archetypal figures. Moses received the 10 Commandments only after 40 years wandering the desert. Jesus was tested and purified for 40 days in the Judean wilderness. The prophet Muhammad found revelation in caves and solitude beneath the desert sky. The desert is the anti-world. Where the forest is wild, overflowing life, the desert is a merciless emptiness, a place that denies every need of the ego. It strips away distraction, vanity, comfort, and most of all, the crowd. There we are reduced to our core. The desert is reality laid bare, and for that reason, it becomes the perfect stage for the most brutally honest inner healing. In Carl Jung's analytical psychology, the desert is the vast, uncharted landscape of the unconscious. Our daily routine, our work, our habits, these are the false oases, the surface waters of life, the territory of the ego. But beneath that surface lies silence and vastness, the home of the truths we refuse to face. It is in the desert of the unconscious that we meet what Jung called the shadow self, the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is everything we reject in ourselves because it doesn't fit our ideal self. It is our raw edge, our unspoken anger, our repressed desires, our unlived vitality, the treasure buried beneath dunes of denial. Why are we afraid? Because the inner desert is the kingdom of solitude. The constant noise of society protects us from hearing the voices of the shadow, but the silence of the desert forces us to listen, and that is what terrifies the ego. The desert process is an alchemical one. Its burning heat symbolizes the pressure and suffering of life. In this burning, the shell of the persona, the social mask, begins to crack. The ego, addicted to control, discovers it is powerless against the vastness. You cannot bargain with the desert. You can only surrender to it. And this surrender is essential for spiritual awakening. Here you are stripped of possessions. Nothing external can save you. Labels. No one knows you here. You are simply the self. And illusions. Your old beliefs crumble like fine sand. The lack of water, the metaphor of emotional and spiritual dryness, forces you to seek the spring within. Only when we stop chasing oases, those external comforts, can inner healing begin. The desert is the soul's shock therapy. If the desert is the unconscious, and the heat is the pressure, then the next stage of our journey is to meet its primary inhabitant, the shadow. This is more than admitting you have a darker side. It is understanding the inner dynamics of this force. The shadow is a magnet. It pulls into your life precisely what you deny. It is powerful enough to destroy you or to set you free. Shadow work begins the moment you stop running and dare to ask, who might I become if I integrated every rejected piece of myself? In the desert, we do not meet the enemy. We meet the forgotten friend. Carl Jung, master of analytical psychology, gave us the most essential tool for this inner crossing, the understanding of the shadow self. The shadow is the sum of everything the ego decides it is not. It is not inherently bad. It is simply unwelcome. It holds our childish impulses, our primitive desires, our anger, envy, greed, but also our buried gifts, raw intuition, untamed strength, healthy sexuality, honest hunger for life, all the bright qualities we repress for fear of losing belonging. Jung once wrote, "Sadly, there is no doubt that man is, in general, less good than he imagines himself to be or wants to be. The shadow is living proof of this truth." Our society, and even many forms of spiritual storytelling, teach us to chase only the light. But Jung requires that we face the dark. Shadow work is never a question of if you will do it, but how. If you avoid it, it possesses you. If you face it, it serves you. The shadow self is not born, it is crafted. As children, we learned quickly which behaviors earned love and which brought punishment or abandonment. The ego, eager to protect us, performed a ruthless cleaning. Everything not good enough for our social mask, the persona, was thrown into the basement of the unconscious, where it became the shadow. And that energy does not disappear. It becomes a reservoir, repressed, autonomous, growing its own hunger, waiting in the desert to be acknowledged. This tension is the root of neurosis. Neurosis is the war between the ego, what we strive to be, and the shadow, what we actually are. To live a small, repressed life is the most common neurosis of modern society, a refusal to begin inner healing through the confrontation the soul demands. How does the shadow manifest when we refuse to do shadow work? It appears in 3 ways. 1. Unexpected outbursts, sudden anger, jealousy, aggression, moments where you say, "That wasn't me." It was. It was the shadow grabbing the steering wheel. 2. Dreams and symbols. The shadow often shows up in dreams as dark figures, predators, strangers, the unconscious trying to speak in the only language it knows. 3. Projection, the key to inner healing. This is most crucial. When we refuse our own darkness, we see it everywhere else. our intense hatred, our obsessive criticism, our fixation on a neighbor's flaws or a public figure's mistakes. These are almost always projections. What irritates you most in others is often what you have locked away in yourself. The desert, by isolating us, breaks this game of projection. With no one left to blame, the shadow turns back home, to your inner life. The purpose of the inner crossing is not to destroy the shadow, it is to speak with it. Successful shadow work transforms this primitive, chaotic force into creative allies and sheer will. When you accept your anger, it becomes the fire of justice. When you accept your fear, it becomes wise caution. This is the spiritual awakening from the ground up. You do not rise, you descend into your foundation. But the encounter is demanding. We need a map. The desert is vast and filled with mirages offering comfort. And the greatest mirage of all is the belief that salvation will come from outside, from an oasis. So we ask, what happens when we search outside for water that exists only within? On this inner crossing, the greatest danger is not physical exhaustion, it is false hope. The oasis is the mirage, the seductive promise that salvation, happiness, and inner healing will arrive from something outside ourselves. The oasis represents every toxic distraction we use to avoid the silence of the desert, the compulsive consuming, the endless chase for validation, the worship of leaders, or even a blind devotion to rituals without the courage for true shadow work. When we stand in the desert of the soul, stripped, exposed, trembling, the ego screams for relief. The oasis whispers the easy answer. If I could just have that, more money, a partner, a new job, my pain would finally end. But this escape is the opposite of authentic spiritual awakening, which demands that we sit in the fire. The oasis keeps us from finding real water, what Jung called the self, the deep well of wholeness hidden inside. And the oasis survives through projection, the central mechanism in analytical psychology for understanding conflict. When we refuse to acknowledge the shadow self, the unconscious has no choice. It must place it somewhere. So it projects. We begin to see our buried fears, our disowned flaws, our repressed hungers in everyone around us. A simple example, if arrogance in your boss or in a public figure fills you with burning hatred, it is very likely that you have repressed your own need for power, your assertiveness, your unexpressed arrogance in your inner life. Projection blinds us. It convinces us that the source of our suffering lives out there, in others, in the world, in the system. It is a comforting illusion, and a destructive one, because it keeps us from taking responsibility for our own shadow. But in the desert, with no crowd left to blame, the shadow turns its mirror unavoidably toward you. The key to spiritual awakening is the withdrawal of projections, the heroic act of admitting, the enemy I see out there is a reflection of what I refuse to meet within. This is true shadow work. It demands humility. It demands courage. And when you reclaim a projection, you do not just improve your relationships. You reclaim the energy you spent pushing your shadow outward. You become denser, steadier, more whole. This journey is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming indivisible, integrating all your archetypes, all your forgotten aspects, including the shadow. Inner healing begins the moment you stop chasing the oasis, the external comfort, and begin accepting the desert's dryness, your own shadow. Because the water, the true self, was always beneath your feet. But withdrawing projections hurts, because in doing so, we lose our favorite excuse for suffering. The ego panics. The old order of our inner life collapses. This is the moment the mystics named the dark night of the soul, the phase of disintegration, when the traveler, having rejected the mirage, finds himself alone in the desert, unsure where to step next. It is the moment that feels as if God has vanished. It is the final test of faith. The dark night of the soul is the turning point. Is the collapse of the ego the end of the journey, or the beginning of the true awakening? We have reached the heart of the desert, the stage the mystical traditions call the dark night of the soul. This moment is not a mere emotional crisis. It is a structural collapse. The ego built its identity, its beliefs, its personal God out of external sources and old conditioning. When the desert, through shadow work, burns those external sources to ashes, the ego feels abandoned by everything it once called sacred. What follows is emptiness, annihilation, a silence so deep it aches. There are no distractions left, no ready-made rules. You stand alone with your inner life. This is not a sign you failed. It is the sign you are in it, the birth pain of spiritual awakening. You are dying to the ego so you can be born into the self. In alchemy, lead becomes gold only through solve et coagule, dissolve and coagulate, initiated by an intense fire. The dark night is that fire. It is the suffering that cannot be explained away, the kind that forces the ego to finally stop resisting. Jung observed that neurosis is ultimately the necessary suffering the unconscious imposes to push the ego to expand. If you refuse to grow consciously, life forces you to grow painfully. In this fire, the old archetypes of victim and martyr burn away, and you are pushed into the archetype of the hermit, the one who finds light only in isolation. Inner healing happens here in the darkness, when you accept the truth that the shadow and the pain are parts of your wholeness. You stop fighting the sand and begin building with it. Faith is no longer a crutch. It becomes your backbone, tested in the emptiness. The night does not last forever. It culminates in the turning point, the moment the exhausted ego finally surrenders to the self. What does it mean to find God in the desert? It does not mean an external being appears in some miraculous oasis. It means you discover the image of God within. You encounter the self, the organizing center of the psyche, the pattern of totality that transcends the ego. This is the true aim of analytical psychology, individuation, the process of becoming whole. The shadow, once an enemy cast outward, is revealed as the very power you had repressed. Darkness is not defeated by light, it is joined with it. You become capable of holding the contradictions of life, strength and weakness, good and evil, order and chaos. This is the essence of post-Jungian spiritual awakening. Divinity is found in the fullness of your inner life, not in any illusion of perfection. Your inner crossing ends as you emerge from the dark night. You are changed. You have learned the language of the desert. From now on, shadow work becomes a daily practice, not a single event. The self is the God you found. Inner healing is the acceptance that the desert is your home, not your exile. You are ready. The journey has reached its peak. The transformation is complete, and the self waits with open hands. But now, you must return to the world. So the question becomes, what message do you carry from the dryness into the abundance? In the loneliness of the dark night, when the ego feels lost, we are met, almost rescued, by the archetypes. In Carl Jung's analytical psychology, archetypes are universal, innate patterns of behavior and image residing in the collective unconscious. They are the ancient characters of our spiritual storytelling. When we walk through the desert of the soul, when crisis strips us to the bone, these patterns awaken. They are not merely symbols, they are living forces, shaping our inner life and giving us the map, or at least the impulse, for the next stage of inner healing. Let's focus on 3 essential companions for the inner crossing and shadow work: the hermit, the hero, and of course, the shadow. The hermit. The hermit appears when we need wisdom, but the wisdom of silence. He does not live in the square, nor in the clamor of the village. He dwells in the desert. And in his hands he carries a lantern, the light of consciousness. What does that light reveal? It reveals the truth once buried beneath noise and projection. The hermit teaches us that spiritual awakening is not a social pursuit, but an interior realization. He validates your isolation not as punishment, but as necessity. He whispers, "The answer you seek is not in the rules of your community, but in the raw, unfiltered depth of your own experience." His task is to help you distinguish the self, the whole, from the ego, the surface. He gives you the courage to face your own shadow without running. The hero. The force that keeps us moving is the archetype of the hero. In the inner crossing, the hero is not the warrior who slays the dragon, but the one who integrates it. Contrary to popular mythology, the hero must fail. He must be wounded. His journey through the desert, the hero's journey through Jung's eyes, is a quest for the philosopher's stone, the alchemical symbol of shadow integration. The shadow as necessary antagonist. The shadow carries the very energy the hero needs to be whole. If the hero is pure light, he is ineffective. He needs the shadow's cunning, its raw strength, its passion. The confrontation. Shadow work is the hero's confrontation with the shadow. The hero must look the shadow in the eyes and say, "You are part of me. I welcome you, not to unleash you upon the world, but to reclaim your creative fire into my inner life." And the self. And the goal of all desert archetypes is the self. The self is the archetype of totality, the circle that contains the hero, the shadow, the hermit, and every other figure moving within you. Spiritual awakening is not complete until inner healing integrates these opposites. The desert forces that integration. And the hero, by accepting the shadow, finds wholeness and a peace that transcends the ego. The wound, then, is the doorway to the sacred. It pushes you off the surface and into the hands of these archetypal teachers. So yes, the pain of the wound is the threshold of the sacred. But the question remains, how does this treasure translate into something tangible in your daily life? We've arrived at the most rewarding point of our inner crossing, the inner healing. After confronting the shadow, dissolving the projections, and surviving the dark night, the traveler no longer seeks to defeat the shadow, but to transform it. This is the heart of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, which found in alchemy the perfect metaphor for psychic transformation. The shadow is the lead, dense, dark, and discarded. Inner healing is the alchemical process of exposing that lead to the fire of consciousness, shadow work, until it becomes gold, a noble, integrated substance. This gold is not material wealth, it is psychological wholeness. And the key insight is this: the shadow's energy was never evil, only misdirected or suppressed. Healing means reclaiming that vital force. So, what is the gold we extract from the shadow self? It is the power that has been locked in the basement of the unconscious. Repressed anger becomes boundaries and passion. What once erupted as disproportionate rage or envy becomes the ability to say no, to assert healthy limits, and to fight for what matters. This is vitality. Repressed fear becomes intuition and prudence. The fear that once paralyzed becomes a finely tuned inner compass, the capacity to sense, to anticipate, to move with awareness. This is survival intelligence. Repressed vulnerability becomes genuine connection. The terror of being seen as weak transforms into the capacity for authentic intimacy, empathy, and compassionate presence, the heart of all meaningful spiritual storytelling. Effective shadow work is the mining of this gold, a radical act of self-love that leads to the deepest inner healing. How do we perform this transmutation? Analytical psychology offers the tools. Active dialogue with the shadow. The ego stops fighting and begins to listen. Close your eyes. Imagine your shadow as a figure, an animal, a shape. Ask it, what are you trying to tell me? What is your positive intention? The answer is almost always a strength seeking recognition. Shadow writing, journaling. Write in the first person as your shadow self. Let the anger, judgment, or cynicism flow uncensored. Giving form to the darkness weakens its grip and makes it familiar. Projection retrieval, daily practice. Whenever someone irritates you intensely, pause and ask, where does this live in me? What aspect of my shadow is this person reflecting? Each time you do this, you unhook the projection and reclaim your vital energy. These practices transform the shadow from predator into an archetypal ally within your inner life. The result of inner healing is the end of the civil war within. By integrating your shadow self, you become authentic. Your morality no longer comes from external rules, the persona, but from an inner ethics tempered in the desert. You no longer chase perfection. You embrace wholeness. This is the spiritual awakening of one who has found God within. You are ready to live life with all its colors, even the darkest ones. The lead is gone. The gold is real. The awakening has happened, but awakening is not the end. So how do you carry this wholeness and wisdom into the world? What is the next step for the traveler who leaves the desert, yet carries the desert within? The spiritual awakening is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new reality. It is not a sudden burst of light, but the deep realization of wholeness born from shadow work and inner healing. The awakening of the desert is different from the awakening of the oasis. The oasis promises transcendence by escaping the body and the shadow. The desert demands transcendence by integrating the shadow. The God you met in the desert is the self, your indivisible psychic center, the place where all archetypes finally meet. This awakening is the inner certainty that you are whole, that the sacred is not outside, but the very fabric of your inner life. You no longer search for meaning. You are meaning. And what is the most tangible fruit of a spiritual awakening rooted in analytical psychology? Authenticity. When you integrate the shadow self, you no longer need the social mask, the persona, to protect you. Moral freedom. Your morality becomes an inner compass informed by your wholeness. You do not fear judgment because you have already judged and accepted every part of yourself. Genuine relationships. Your relationships cease to be stages for projection. They become soul encounters. You love others not despite their shadows, but because you recognize the shared complex humanity in both of you. The end of the external hunt. Awakening brings contentment. The ego stops chasing the oasis because the water source, your own inner healing, is always accessible from within. The traveler who leaves the desert carries a completely new relationship with suffering. The wisdom of dryness is resilience forged in the dark night. Sorrow stops feeling like punishment and becomes teacher. You understand that crises, your deserts, are not to be avoided but entered because they deepen shadow work and your connection to the self. This ability to find meaning in pain is the mark of true inner healing and the proof that the inner crossing was completed with integrity. It is the opposite of victimhood. It is responsibility for your own existence, with all its darkness and all its light. The spiritual storytelling you now carry is one of strength and compassion, because you have been to the bottom and returned. But the final challenge of every awakening is the return. The wisdom found in the desert cannot stay there. You must bring it back to the world of the oasis without falling again into old illusions. The desert becomes your inner sanctuary, the place you return to whenever you need truth. Life will continue to offer new shadows and new deserts, but now you carry the compass, the inner water, and the knowledge of the archetypes. The transformation is complete. The shadow is gold. The self has been found. But the question remains: how do you ensure that the wisdom of the desert survives the noise and haste of the world? The paradox of the inner crossing is that when you leave the desert, you discover the desert now lives within you, not as an open wound, but as an inner sanctuary, a chamber of truth, silence, and power. This is the final proof of spiritual awakening. You no longer fear solitude or silence, because they have become your most precious resources. You've learned to trust your inner life and the self. Inner healing is not a static state. It is a continuous devotion. The dryness of the desert taught you that life demands shedding. To keep the gold, the integrated shadow, you need a daily practice that prevents a return to projection and illusion. How do you ensure that the shadow self remains an ally and not a saboteur? Through ongoing shadow work. Daily withdrawal of projections. This is your vigilance. Whenever you feel a strong emotion, anger, judgment, obsessive attraction, pause and consciously pull back the projection. Ask, which unresolved part of my shadow am I seeing in this person? This keeps your psychological energy intact. Cultivation of awareness, active hermit. Use quiet to reconnect with the archetype of the hermit. Set aside time for introspection, meditation, journaling. This is where you check your moral compass and ensure your outer actions align with your inner truth. Dialogue with the unconscious. Practices like active imagination, Jung's own method, allow you to keep speaking with your shadow and other archetypes, keeping them updated, integrated, alive. Through this, analytical psychology becomes a way of living, a philosophy that ensures your spiritual storytelling remains authentic. The purpose of awakening is not isolated enlightenment, but the ability to live in the world as a whole human being. A person with an integrated shadow moves through the oasis of society in a new way. Moral resilience. You become immune to hypocrisy because you've accepted your own. You can fight for justice without falling into self-righteousness, the shadow of wanting to be perfect. Authentic leadership. Your leadership grows compassionate and firm. You can hold the light and the darkness in others because you can hold them in yourself. You project the authority of the self, not the arrogance of the ego. Unlocked creativity. The shadow's gold expresses itself as a surge of creative force and vitality. The energy once trapped in repression is now free to build, shape, create. You are no longer seeking inner healing, you are living it. The journey is complete. The inner crossing has transformed you from a divided being into a whole one. The desert has become your teacher. From here on, your life itself is the proof of your spiritual awakening. The self leads the way. Only one thing remains: the farewell, the closing of this cycle and the opening of a new one. Truth was found in the dryness. The shadow has become gold. And now, traveler, it is time to leave this space and carry your new wholeness into the life waiting for you. So what is the final call to action that sustains this journey? Live as the one you became in the desert. Walk with integrity. Choose presence over projection, silence over noise, truth over comfort. And remember, the desert is no longer a place you visit. It is the inner ground from which you rise. We've reached the end of this long, profound inner crossing. From the first fear of solitude to the final encounter with the self, we've uncovered the power of analytical psychology and the sacred purpose of shadow work. You discovered that your shadow self was never meant to be destroyed, but forged into gold. You survived the dryness of the desert, the dark night, and reached a true spiritual awakening, an inner healing rooted in wholeness, not escape. The truth is this: the desert where you found God was inside you all along, and now you are the guardian of that inner sanctuary. Your journey does not end here. The wisdom of the desert is meant to be lived, not remembered. If the story of this inner crossing stirred the shadow you carry, if you feel the call to reclaim your strength and your inner wholeness, then your soul work, your shadow work, begins now. Our channel isn't just spiritual storytelling. It is the alchemy of transforming pain into wisdom and silence into voice. Join us. Subscribe to Shadow Work Stories and activate the bell so you don't miss the next archetypal journey. Continue your immersion. Leave a like if you too believe in the power of wholeness, and click the video appearing now on your screen to keep descending into the journey of the self. Remember, your self is waiting. Wholeness is your destiny.